How is it the workplace culture for you went from being something that was an interesting topic to, I'll quit my Twitter VP job to pursue this? How did that happen?
Yes, so broadly what happened is that I made a calamitous mistake. And it was in the act of digging myself out of that I became sort of connected and transfixed with what was there to do. So broadly what happened was I found myself guilty of what I think a lot of managers might do, bosses might do. They think that the best thing that they can possibly do is be the provider, the purveyor of good news. And so, and we witnessed some of this in the way that different leaders have responded to the COVID pandemic. Those who've stood on platforms saying we're going to have world-beating solutions and we're going to have the very, very best of the best, and it's all about to get better, have often found themselves having created unrealistic expectations and created false optimism. And I was definitely guilty of that. Twitter was a business that was having problems. It was going through traditional ups and downs that I think a lot of firms have, but we were having them really graphically. And I found myself erring on the side of being the cheerleader for why things were going to get better. And what you discover when that happens is if things don't get better, that people find themselves in a state of dissonance where emotionally they feel that, hang on, I was told that things were going to get better. And then rationally, they have this sort of a series of family, friends, colleagues saying, have you seen the latest article about Twitter? And, they're in this position of dissonance. It's a little bit, whenever we find ourselves in conflict like that, there's normally a long process where we initially find ourselves arguing with these naysayers. And there is normally a moment where we realize that the tsunami of evidence against what we initially believed is becoming overwhelming, and we suddenly turn. And so, I witnessed about 40% of our London office left in 1 year, and it forces you to, I think, either decide that 2/5 of the workforce were half-witted fools, or you're forced to confront, right, okay, something's gone wrong and maybe I'm responsible for it. So I set about thinking, as a mea culpa, what can I do to try and understand what has gone wrong at my workforce, what I can do to try and make things better. And I started looking into it, really. Candidly, I was looking for a nice, easy to read book on Amazon about workplace culture. And what I discovered was there's no easy book that I could grab off the shelves. And so I ended up searching for evidence and making one myself, really. I started off with a podcast. The podcast was just, like I've mentioned before, just a path of curiosity. So it was just an attempt for me to maybe pick the brains of intelligent people. I've done over 100 episodes now, and it became, self-directed learning, really. I would find something fascinating. I would find something intriguing, and I would normally contact the professor behind it and ask to speak to them. So, it was sort of self-directed learning. And what I discovered along the way, I think what was the real epiphany for me was that I discovered along the way that there was a whole load of research, of evidence that would help any of us improve our workplaces, make work better. And very little of it was reaching people in jobs. And so, this became sort of a penny drop moment for me when I discovered that open plan offices had terrible research against them, or when I discovered that, the various other flaws in the way we were working. Interruptions are one of the worst things that we can be beset by. And so as I was discovering each of these things, I was thinking, wow, work to a large extent is a lie that we tell ourselves. Work is sort of this tissue of lies, and if we could only disabuse ourselves of these untruths, then we might be able to make work better for all of us.
So when you're digging into this research and I didn't even realize this, so there was no original passion. It was just, out of practicality, you need to work out what was going on. Digging through this research. Oh yeah, go on.
I think from a subjective experience. I think from a subjective experience, I always loved, I was very fortunate that I worked in some really good places. And, you know, so I worked for part of a radio group, and we used to meet our peers who worked in other radio companies. And it was evident that we were enjoying ourselves more, but also more successful than them. And so it was a curiosity I always had. And everyone who worked at this part of a company often used to speak very fondly of the culture, of the dynamic that existed there. And so, you know, I think from a layperson's interest, I always had a curiosity with work, but it wasn't necessarily something that I'd ever expected to turn into semi-academic study, really.
And when you're doing this research, was there like a moment where you thought, you know what, actually, this is it, this is what I want to do? Or was it just did it just kind of take you over without you even realizing?
Yeah, I mean, it was gradual, really. So I found myself, what happened was I was doing this podcast, and the podcast very much was, you know, to be sort of candid about it. It was me traveling in my downtime to go and meet people, or me contacting US professors after a day at work, then editing it at the weekends and then putting it out. And it was sort of like this, I think, in the same way that some people play golf, some people watch sports. I was just doing this as a distraction, really. And people used to contact me when I'd done about 20 episodes and it had developed quite a following. People contacted me saying, "Oh, I wonder if you'd like to come in and do a lunchtime talk here about what you've learned." And then I ended up doing a couple of conferences about that. And then it sort of developed into something where I was getting more and more requests. And in fact, my podcast became #1 business podcast. And while it was #1 business podcast, Penguin Books contacted me saying, "Would you be interested in turning this into a book?" So, you know, at no step of the way did I ever have a overt, explicit plan
Master plan
of what I wanted to do. It was more, you know, my advice, and I strongly sort of give this advice to anyone, is that if you ever feel like you're in a rut, in a hole, or wanting to discover something, then start doing stuff. Because, you know, the very act of starting to do stuff, you know, whether it is learning what works, what doesn't work, whether it's the stimulation you get from meeting random people. One of my best friends, he's one of the people I interviewed on the podcast now. And so, you know, you find yourself in very unexpected situations from these scenarios. So look, you know, just have a go, experiment, do stuff. I think that would be my strong advice.
And is that kind of, because, you know, sometimes people have a voice in their head, or, you know, something on their shoulder that kind of, they feel like it's whispering to them, and they ignore it, like, you know, I can't do that or whatever. Is that, do stuff like connected with that, or is that literally just like, if you don't know what you're doing, just do random stuff and just see what happens?
I just think personally, you know, I don't watch a lot of TV, but, you know, doing stuff, whether it's writing a diary, a journal, whether it's, you know, doing a podcast, learning photography, meeting people in any capacity. I think when you find yourself doing things, one of my other best friends, I didn't know a couple of years ago, and he's a poet, and I just love hanging. He's got a music studio. I love hanging with him. I love spending time with him. You know, I think there is something really re-energizing about spending time with new people and sort of learning new things. And so, you know, I always give the advice to people, if you're in any doubt, just start doing stuff, because #1, you'll discover whether you like it or not. And #2, like, new and stimulating opportunities come from it.